I'm Margaret Thompson, 78 years old, a woman who has lived a long and I thought a good life. And I am the woman whose grandson, the boy I raised as my own son, just told me to get out of my own house. Those were his words, not "I think it's time for a change," not "maybe we should look at other options." Just four ice-cold words spat into the air of the living room my husband built with his own two hands. Just leave, Graham, now. It's funny, the things you remember in a moment like that. It wasn't the sting of the words themselves that hit me first, but the silence that followed. It was a heavy, thick silence that swallowed the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, the gentle hum of the refrigerator, all the small, comforting sounds of a home I had known for over 50 years. In that silence, I saw the face of my grandson, Leo, twisted into a mask of petulance I hadn't seen since he was a toddler. He was 32 years old, a grown man with a wife, Jessica, who stood beside him, her arms crossed, nodding like one of those dashboard dogs. Her expression wasn't angry, it was triumphant. This wasn't a storm that appeared out of a clear blue sky. The clouds had been gathering for years, so slowly I had mistaken them for the normal haze of family life. Leo was my only grandchild, the son of my dear Michael, who was taken from us far too soon in a car accident when Leo was just 5. My husband, Richard, and I didn't hesitate. We brought that heartbroken little boy into our home and raised him. After Richard passed away 10 years ago, it was just me and Leo, and then 3 years ago, Jessica. When they married, it seemed only natural for them to stay. The house was enormous, an old colonial with more rooms than I could ever use. It'll be a perfect place to start a family, I'd told them, my heart swelling at the thought of great-grandchildren filling these halls again. But the hints of their true nature, the little tremors before the earthquake, were there. I see them so clearly now. The first was about a year after they were married. I have an old, reliable Buick that Richard bought for me a few years before he died. It gets me to the grocery store, to my book club, to the cemetery to visit Richard and Michael. It's all I need. But to Leo and Jessica, it was an embarrassment. "Graham, you can't be seen driving that thing," Leo said one evening, tossing his car keys onto the polished mahogany table Richard had made in his workshop. He and Jessica had just bought a brand new metallic gray SUV that cost more than my Buick had when it was new. "People will think we're not taking care of you." I remember smiling, a little confused. "But you are taking care of me, dear, and I'm taking care of you. We're a family." Jessica chimed in, her voice as smooth and sweet as poisoned honey. "What Leo means, Margaret, is that appearances matter. We have a certain image to uphold. Leo's in finance, it's all about perception." They wanted me to co-sign a loan for a luxury sedan for myself, a car I didn't want and couldn't comfortably afford on my fixed income. When I politely but firmly refused, explaining that my Buick was perfectly fine and that taking on debt at my age was unwise, the mood soured. It wasn't outrage, not yet. It was a cool disappointment, a subtle withdrawal of affection. For a week, their conversations were shorter, their smiles didn't quite reach their eyes. They treated my refusal not as a practical decision, but as a personal slight, as if my contentment with my simple life was a judgment on their ambition. The second tremor was more significant. It was last summer. They'd been talking for months about a trip to Italy. Not a budget-friendly tour, but a 2-week fantasy of 5-star hotels, private drivers, and what Jessica called curated experiences. They showed me glossy brochures and websites, their eyes gleaming with a desire that felt more like hunger. The problem, as always, was money. Despite Leo's high-powered finance job, they lived right up to the edge of their means and often a little beyond. "If we could just free up some capital," Leo said, staring at me meaningfully over dinner. "The market is great right now." He wasn't talking about stocks, he was talking about the house, my house. I pretended not to understand. A few days later, Jessica approached me while I was gardening, my one true solace. "Margaret," she began, kneeling beside my prize-winning roses, "Leo and I were thinking, this house is so much equity just sitting here, doing nothing. If you were to sell, we could all live so much better. You could have a beautiful condo, no maintenance, and we could get our dream house. And there'd be plenty left over for things like, well, like Italy." The audacity of it stole my breath. This wasn't just a house, it was a living museum of my life. I could still see Michael taking his first steps in the living room. I could feel Richard's hand on my back as we danced in. The kitchen on our 40th anniversary. Every scuff on the floor, every faded patch of wallpaper held a story. "This house is not for sale, Jessica," I said, my voice firmer than I intended. "It's my home, it's your home." "But it's not the home we want," she'd replied, her smile tightening. The mask had slipped just for a second, and I saw the raw, grasping greed beneath. That was when the disappointment turned to pressure, a constant, grinding campaign to wear me down. Every conversation, every shared meal was laced with hints about the burdens of a big house, the money we could have, the life they felt they were being denied. They made me feel like a warden, and my home a prison keeping them from their destiny. They had stopped seeing me as their grandmother. I had become an obstacle that, on a cold Tuesday in November, they finally decided to remove. The final argument started, as most of them did, over something trivial that was really about everything. It was a Tuesday evening, and a letter had arrived from the homeowners association about needing to replace a section of the original slate roof. It was an expensive but necessary repair, one I was prepared for. I kept a separate account for household maintenance, a lesson Richard had drilled into me. "A house this old is a living thing, Maggie," he used to say. You have to feed it, or it'll eat you." I brought it up at the dinner table, thinking of it as a simple household matter. "The estimate for the roof repair is about $10,000, I said, placing the letter next to my plate. "I'll call the contractor tomorrow." Leo put his fork down with a clatter. $10,000, he repeated, his voice flat. "Just like that, gone." Jessica sighed dramatically. "See, this is what we're talking about, Leo. It's a money pit. We're pouring money into a black hole when we could be investing in our future." "It's not a black hole, Jessica, it's our home," I said, my patience wearing thin. "And it's not our money being poured into it. I am paying for it from the household account." "But it could be our money," Leo burst out, his face flushing. "That's the point, Graham, that $10,000, the money for the property taxes, the insurance. If you would just sell, it would all go into one big pot. Our pot, we could leverage it. I could make that 10,000 into 100,000 in a year. Instead, you're throwing it at some dusty old roof tiles." The contempt in his voice was a physical blow. Dusty old roof tiles. He was talking about the roof Richard had chosen, the one he'd climbed up on himself to check every autumn. "I am not selling my home, Leo," I said, my voice low and trembling with a mix of anger and hurt. "This conversation is over." "No, it's not over," he shouted, standing up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the wood floor. "I am sick of this. I'm sick of living in your museum, playing by your ancient rules. We are trying to build a life, a real life, not just exist in your past." "Leo, that is enough," I said, rising to my feet as well, my heart hammering against my ribs. "No, you don't get it. You've had your life. You had your time with Grandpa. You raised Dad here. It's our turn, and you're standing in the way. You are holding us back, Graham. All our friends are buying second homes, they're investing, they're living. And we're stuck here begging you for our own inheritance." "It is not your inheritance until I am gone." The words were out before I could stop them, sharp and cold. Jessica gasped, placing a hand on Leo's arm. "Margaret, that's a horrible thing to say." But Leo just laughed, a bitter, ugly sound. "Oh, I see. So we're just supposed to wait for you to die. Is that the plan? We put our lives on hold for another 10, 20 years while you potter around in your garden." Tears pricked my eyes, hot, angry tears. "I raised you in this house, Leo, after your father, after Michael. I gave you everything. This is how you repay me." "Repay you?" he scoffed. "We're not the ones who are being selfish. We've offered you a great deal, a beautiful condo, all expenses paid, you'd be comfortable, but you'd rather cling to this pile of bricks and memories than see your own family happy." He took a deep breath, and his face hardened into something I didn't recognize at all. It was the face of a stranger. "You know what, Graham? You've always done this. Pretended to be the perfect, sacrificing matriarch, but you're just stubborn." "You still disappointed us," Mom said. "Wait, no, that's not right. You disappoint me, Graham." He was mocking something, some story he'd read online, twisting it into a weapon against me. It made no sense, and all the sense in the world. He looked at Jessica, who gave a small, sharp nod. The decision was made. The air crackled with it. "We can't do this anymore," Leo said, his voice suddenly calm, which was more terrifying than his shouting. "We can't build our future on your terms. If you won't be part of the solution, then you're the problem." He walked over to me, standing so close I could see the flecks of gold in his hazel eyes, Michael's eyes. There was no love in them. No memory of the little boy I'd held through nightmares, the teenager I'd guided through heartbreak, the man whose wedding I had wept at with joy. There was nothing but cold, hard resolve. You said this conversation is over. You're right, it is. Just leave, Graham, now. I stared at him, my mind refusing to process the words. Leave, Leo, this is my house. Not anymore, Jessica said from behind him, her voice like flint. It's a family asset and you're mismanaging it. It's time for a change in management. Pack a bag, go to a hotel, we'll forward your mail. I looked from his face to hers. They were a united front. They had planned this. This wasn't a fight that got out of hand, it was an execution. The blood drained from my face and a strange, hollow feeling opened up in my chest. I felt lightheaded, dizzy, as if the world had tilted on its axis. I stumbled back and put a hand on the dining room table to steady myself. The wood was cool and solid beneath my palm. A lifetime of dinners, of laughter, of tears, all contained in that table. And I was being told to leave it. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the dining room, past the grandfather clock that had chimed on the hour of my son's birth, and up the grand staircase I had descended as a bride. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else. I went into my bedroom, the room I had shared with Richard for 45 years, and opened my closet. What do you pack when you are being exiled from your own life? I pulled out a small suitcase, the one Richard and I used for weekend trips to the coast. I packed a few sensible blouses, a pair of slacks, my toiletries, the silver-framed photograph of Richard from my nightstand, and the worn copy of Pride and Prejudice I read every year. As I zipped the suitcase, I could hear them downstairs. They weren't whispering. They were talking in normal voices, planning. I heard the clink of glasses. They were celebrating. I walked back down the stairs, my suitcase in hand. They were standing in the entryway, waiting, as if to make sure I followed their orders. Leo had his wallet out. He pulled out a few $100 bills and held them out to me. This should cover you for a few nights until you figure things out. I looked at the money, then at his face. And for the first time that night, a flicker of strength, hot and pure, cut through the shock. I lifted my chin and looked past him, through him. I didn't take the money. I don't need your charity, Leo, I said, my voice barely a whisper, but it carried in the silent hall. I walked to the front door, opened it, and stepped out into the cold November night. I didn't look back. As I closed the door behind me, the click of the latch sounded like a final, unbreachable wall falling into place. I had just become a ghost in my own life. The first hotel I found was a sterile, beige box off the highway called the Crestview Inn. There was no crest and no view unless you counted the parking lot and the flickering sign of a 24-hour diner. The boy at the front desk had headphones on and barely looked at me as I paid in cash for 3 nights. He slid a plastic keycard across the counter and that was it. No welcome, no enjoy your stay, just a transaction. My room smelled of stale smoke and industrial cleaner. The carpet was a swirl of nauseating brown and orange, the bedspread was thin and stiff, and the only art on the wall was a generic print of a sailboat on a placid, lifeless sea. I sat on the edge of the bed, my small suitcase on the floor beside me. The silence in this room was different from the silence in my house. It wasn't heavy, it was empty, a vacuum that echoed my own hollowness. For the first hour, I did nothing. I just sat there, my hands clasped in my lap, staring at the sailboat. I tried to make sense of it, to replay the scene in my mind and find the moment where I could have changed the outcome. What if I had just agreed to the roof repair without mentioning the cost? What if I had been gentler in my refusal to sell? What if, years ago, I had been stricter with Leo, taught him the value of a dollar instead of cushioning every fall? The what-ifs were a swarm of angry bees, and I had no defense against them. Grief is a strange country, and I was an undocumented immigrant within its borders. It wasn't the clean grief I had felt when Richard and Michael died. That was a pain born of love and loss, a pain that, while immense, had a certain purity. This was a dirty, complicated grief, tangled up with betrayal, shame, and a profound sense of failure. My own grandson. The boy whose scraped knees I had bandaged, whose report cards I had celebrated, whose heart I had tried to mend after his father died. He had looked at me and seen nothing more than an obstacle. That night I didn't sleep. I lay in the strange bed, fully clothed, listening to the roar of trucks on the highway and the clank of the ice machine down the hall. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Leo's face, the cold dismissal in his eyes. I saw Jessica's smug little nod. I saw the front door of my home closing, shutting me out in the dark. The next morning, I forced myself to move. I unpacked my few things, arranging them in the cheap particle board dresser. I placed Richard's picture on the nightstand. His kind, crinkling eyes seemed to look at me with concern. "Oh, Maggie," I could almost hear him say, "what have they done?" Talking to his photograph became my only comfort. The days bled into one another. I paid for 3 more nights and then a full week. My routine was minimal. I'd walk to the diner for breakfast, where I'd nurse a cup of coffee for an hour reading my book. Then I'd walk back to the hotel and sit. Sometimes I watched television, mindless game shows where people shrieked with joy over a new washer and dryer. The absurdity of it, the simple happiness, felt like it was from another planet. I felt a deep, penetrating shame. I didn't want anyone to see me. When I saw a woman my age at the grocery store next to the diner, laughing with her daughter as they picked out vegetables, I felt a pang so sharp I had to turn away. I was a 78-year-old homeless woman, a secret refugee. What had I done wrong to end up here? The question haunted me. Maybe Leo was right. Maybe I was stubborn, selfish, a relic clinging to the past. The seeds of doubt they had planted were taking root in the fertile soil of my loneliness. I thought about calling my friends, the ladies from my book club or my gardening circle, but what would I say? "Hello, Mary? Yes, I'm fine, except my grandson kicked me out of my house and I'm living in a motel next to a highway. How are your petunias?" The humiliation was a physical barrier in my throat. I was paralyzed by it. One afternoon, about a week into my exile, I was staring at Richard's picture, tears streaming down my face. I was at my lowest point. The money Leo had tried to give me was long gone, and the cash I had in my purse was dwindling. The despair was a physical weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I felt utterly and completely alone, adrift on that placid, lifeless sea from the painting on the wall. And then, looking at Richard's smiling face, another face swam into my memory. Arthur Pendleton, Richard's best friend since they were boys, the best man at our wedding, the lawyer who had handled our affairs for 40 years. Arthur was sharp, cantankerous, and fiercely loyal. After Richard died, he'd call me every few months. "Just checking in, Maggie," he'd grumble, "making sure that grandson of yours isn't selling the family silver." It was a joke, but it wasn't. Arthur had never fully trusted Leo's smooth charm. My last conversation with him had been 6 months ago. I hadn't called him because I was ashamed to admit how right his joke had been. But now, sitting in that bleak hotel room, his memory was a tiny pinprick of light in the suffocating darkness. He was the only person in the world who might understand, the only one who had known Richard and Michael, who understood what that house truly represented. My hand trembled as I picked up my phone and scrolled through the contacts. My finger hovered over his name, Arthur Pendleton. Fear held me back, fear of his pity, fear of his "I told you so." But the alternative, sitting in this room until my money and my spirit ran out, was unthinkable. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, I pressed the call button. It rang once, twice, 3 times. I was about to hang up when a familiar, gravelly voice answered. "A Pendleton." "Arthur," I whispered, my voice cracking. "It's Margaret Thompson." There was a pause. "Maggie, is everything all right? You sound terrible." And with those simple words of concern, the dam broke. The shame, the grief, the loneliness of the past week came pouring out in a flood of incoherent sobs. I couldn't speak. I just cried, clutching the phone like a lifeline. "Maggie," he said, his voice softer now but firm. "Maggie, talk to me. Where are you? What's happened?" It took me a few minutes to compose myself enough to speak. Arthur waited patiently on the other end of the line, his silence a comforting presence rather than an empty one. Finally, I took a ragged breath and told him everything. I started with the constant pressure to sell, the arguments, the insults, and ended with the 4 words that had shattered my world. "Just leave, Graham, now." I told him where I was, in a cheap hotel off the highway, feeling like my life was over. For a long moment after I finished, Arthur said nothing. I could hear the faint sound of his breathing. I worried I had shocked him into silence. Then he spoke, and his voice was a low rumble of controlled fury. "That ungrateful little whelp," he growled. I swear on your husband's grave, Maggie, I am going to tear him apart, legally speaking. Kicked you out of your own home, Richard's home. I don't know what to do, Arthur, I whispered. I feel so lost. Maybe they're right, maybe I'm just. Don't you dare finish that sentence, he cut in sharply. You are not the problem here. The problem is a 32-year-old boy who thinks the world owes him a living and a 30-year-old woman who is feeding his worst impulses. Now you listen to me. You are not going to spend one more night in that Fleabag hotel. I'm booking you a room at the Ashton downtown, a proper hotel with room service and comfortable sheets. I'll pay for it, don't argue. And tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock sharp, you will be in my office. We are going to fix this. For the first time in a week, I felt a flicker of something other than despair. It wasn't quite hope, but it was its cousin, resolve. Arthur's anger on my behalf was like a transfusion of strength. He wasn't pitying me, he was arming me. The next morning, I checked out of the Crestview Inn without a backward glance and took a taxi to the stately brick building that housed Arthur's law firm. His office was on the top floor, a corner suite filled with old books, leather chairs, and the reassuring scent of paper and polish. It felt safe. Arthur greeted me with a hug that was surprisingly gentle for such a gruff man. He was exactly as I remembered, tall and slightly stooped, with a shock of white hair and eyes as sharp and intelligent as ever. He poured me a cup of tea and sat me down in a comfortable chair opposite his massive oak desk. All right, Maggie, he said, getting straight to business. Let's talk logistics. First and most importantly, the house, who is on the deed. Well, Richard and I were, I said. After he passed, I assumed it was just me. Arthur nodded, already pulling a file from a drawer. I took the liberty of looking up the county records this morning. You are correct. The property at 427 Elm Street is in your name and your name alone, free and clear. The mortgage was paid off 17 years ago. Legally speaking, Maggie, that house is as much yours as the coat on your back. Leo and his wife are, in the eyes of the law, tenants. Tenants who are not paying rent. The words hung in the air, tenants. It was such a cold, impersonal word for my own grandson, but it was also clarifying. It stripped away the messy emotions and left a simple legal fact. Now, he continued, leaning forward, you mentioned paying for the roof repair from a household account. Tell me about that. I explained that Richard and I had always kept a separate savings account, which was now my sole responsibility for the major upkeep of the house, property taxes, insurance, emergency repairs. And do Leo and Jessica contribute to this account? He asked. I shook my head. No, they pay for their own groceries and their car payments and, well, their clothes and things. I've always handled the big stuff. The taxes alone are nearly $15,000 a year. I never wanted to burden them. Arthur let out a short, humorless laugh. Burden them? Maggie, you haven't been burdening them. You've been subsidizing their entire lifestyle. They have been living for free in $1 million home while you foot all the major bills. How have you been funding this, if you don't mind my asking? Your pension and Social Security can't possibly cover all that. I hesitated, feeling a flush of embarrassment. It felt like I was confessing a secret foolishness. Richard was a very clever man, Arthur. Before he retired, he bought a small 4-unit apartment building downtown. Nothing fancy, but it's fully occupied. The rental income from that, that's what I use. It goes into the household account every month. It pays the taxes, the insurance, the utilities, everything. Arthur stared at me, his sharp eyes wide with something approaching awe. He leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. Let me get this straight. You own a rental property, and you have been using the income from that property to pay all the expenses of the house your grandson is living in, the very house he just kicked you out of. Oh yes, I said meekly. And does Leo know about this rental property? Does he know where the money for the taxes and utilities comes from? I don't think so, I admitted. We never really talked about it. He just assumes the bills get paid. He thinks of it as the house's money, not my money. A slow smile spread across Arthur's face. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a shark that has just spotted a particularly plump seal. Oh, Maggie, he said, his voice filled with a grim satisfaction. This is better than I could have imagined. This is not just a legal case, this is poetic justice. He stood up and began to pace in front of his large window which overlooked the city square. They have made a fatal error, a classic amateur's mistake. They assumed your kindness was weakness. They saw a sweet old woman and they forgot you were Richard Thompson's wife. They forgot you have a spine of steel. He turned back to me, his eyes gleaming. Here is what we are going to do. Step 1, you are going to go to the bank this afternoon and open a new checking account in your name only, an account at a completely different bank. Step 2, you will contact the property manager of your apartment building and have all future rental income deposited directly into that new account. The household account will no longer be funded. Step 3, we stop paying the property taxes. We stop paying the homeowner's insurance. We stop paying the gas, the electric, the water. We cut them off. I gasped, but the taxes are due in 3 months. If they're not paid, the county will put a lien on the property. Exactly, Arthur beamed. And when the shut-off notices start arriving and the lien is filed, who do you think the utility companies and the county will contact? Not the tenants. They'll contact the owner of record, you, or more likely your legal representative, me. He sat back down, the plan fully formed in his mind. They have kicked you out, Maggie, so you will take yourself and your financial support out of the equation entirely. They want to be the adults in charge? Fine, let them handle the adult responsibilities. Let's see how long their image lasts without electricity. Let's see how they finance their dream house with a tax lien on their credit history. He had one last step. And then, once they are well and truly panicked, we will serve them with a formal legal eviction notice, giving them 30 days to vacate your property. It was a breathtakingly ruthless plan. It was also perfect. A part of me, the soft, grandmotherly part, shrank from the idea of being so calculating. But another part of me, the part that had been trampled and discarded, felt a surge of cold, hard anger. They had started this war. Arthur was simply giving me the weapons to win it. Can we really do that? I asked, my voice trembling slightly. Arthur reached across the desk and patted my hand. His touch was firm and reassuring. Maggie, we are not doing anything illegal. We are simply ceasing to be generous. You are no longer their safety net. You are no longer the bank of grandma. You are Margaret Thompson, a property owner, and you are reclaiming what is rightfully yours. Now, let's go open that new bank account. Walking out of Arthur's office and into the crisp autumn air, I felt like a different woman than the one who had walked in. The fog of despair had lifted, replaced by the clear, cold air of purpose. The shame was still there, a faint echo in the back of my mind, but it was now overshadowed by a burgeoning sense of righteous anger. They had mistaken my love for a liability. It was time to show them it was their greatest and now forfeited asset. Our first stop was a bank I had never used before, a sleek, modern building of glass and steel. It felt anonymous, which was exactly what I wanted. Arthur came in with me, a silent, imposing guardian, while I opened a new private checking account. I signed the documents with a hand that was surprisingly steady. The young woman helping me smiled, oblivious to the revolution I was starting with a simple signature. I gave her the contact information for my rental properties management company, along with a letter Arthur had drafted, instructing them to divert all future payments to this new account. It was done in less than 20 minutes. The first stone had been laid. Next, we returned to Arthur's office. He handed me a stack of papers. They were copies of all the household bills that were on automatic payment from the old account. The power, the gas, the water, the high-speed internet they couldn't live without, the premium cable package Jessica had insisted on. One by one, I called the companies. My voice was calm and polite. Hello, my name is Margaret Thompson, I would begin. I'm calling to cancel the automatic payment for the account linked to the property at 427 Elm Street. Yes, that's right. I wish to remove my payment information entirely. Some of the customer service agents were confused. Ma'am, the bill will become due at the end of the month. It will be the responsibility of the residents at that address. I understand completely, I would reply, a cool resolve settling in my bones. Thank you for your help. With each call, I felt a layer of my old, accommodating self sloughing away. I was no longer the gentle, quiet woman who avoided conflict at all costs. I was a force of nature, redirecting a river of money that they had taken for granted, letting it carve a new path that led only to me. They had wanted to be in charge, I was simply giving them WH. They wanted full responsibility, full consequences. The final and most difficult task was drafting the eviction notice. Arthur handled the legal language, citing their status as tenants at will who were being given the legally required 30 days notice to vacate the premises. But he insisted I write a short, personal letter to accompany it. It shouldn't be emotional, he advised, just factual, a final statement of your position before the legal process takes over completely. I sat at a small desk in his office, a sheet of his heavy, cream-colored stationery in front of me. What do you say to the boy you raised? How do you distill a lifetime of love and a chasm of betrayal into a few short paragraphs? I decided to keep it simple, to mirror the coldness they had shown me. Leo, as per your instructions on the evening of November 12th, I have removed myself from the home at 427 Elm Street. I have also, accordingly, removed my financial support from the property. All household expenses, including but not limited to mortgage, property taxes, insurance, utilities, and general maintenance, are now the sole responsibility of the residents. Enclosed, you will find a formal, legal notice to vacate the premises within 30 days. This is my home, and I intend to occupy it. This was not the future I envisioned for us, but it is the situation your actions have created. Margaret. I signed my name, the ink stark and black against the page. There were no love, Graham, no yours truly. Just Margaret, a name, a property owner, a stranger. I folded the letter, slid it into the envelope with the legal notice, and handed it to Arthur. He would have it delivered by a court-appointed process server. There would be no question of its seriousness. The next few weeks were a strange limbo. I lived at the Ashton Hotel, a place of quiet luxury that felt like a different universe from the Crestview Inn. I had meals in the restaurant, I read books in the plush lobby, and I took long walks in the city park. I was comfortable, I was safe, but I was not at peace. I was waiting. Every morning I woke with a knot of anxiety in my stomach. I was waiting for the phone to ring. I was waiting for the inevitable explosion of rage from Leo when he finally understood what I had done. Arthur had warned me it might take a while. Entitled people have a high tolerance for ignoring reality, he'd said. They'll assume the bills were paid by mistake or that it's a computer glitch. They won't believe the Bank of Grandma is truly closed until the lights go out. He was right. The first month passed in silence. The eviction notice was served. The process server's report stated that a Ms. Jessica Thompson had accepted the envelope with a dismissive laugh. They probably thought it was a joke, a scare tactic from a hysterical old woman. They had no idea. I filled my days with purpose. I met with a financial advisor Arthur recommended, someone to help me manage my assets more formally. I reconnected with a few old friends, telling them a sanitized version of the story, that I was having the house remodeled and was staying in the city for a while. They were happy to see me, and their company was a soothing balm on my bruised spirit. Slowly, I was building a new life for myself, independent of the one I'd had. I was Margaret Thompson, a woman of means and friends, a resident of the city. I was not just a grandmother, not just a widow, I was myself. But every night in the quiet of my hotel room, I would look at Richard's picture and wonder. Had I done the right thing? Was this strength or was it cruelty? Richard had been a man of immense integrity, but also of great compassion. What would he have said? He would have said you're protecting his legacy, Arthur told me during one of our weekly check-in calls. He would be damn proud of you for refusing to let those two vultures destroy everything he built for you, for Michael, and for the boy Leo was supposed to be. His words helped. I held on to them as the second month passed. The property taxes went unpaid, the insurance lapsed, the utility bills piled up unanswered, and still silence. It was the calm before the storm, and the waiting was stretching my nerves to their breaking point. And then, on a Tuesday afternoon, almost 3 months to the day since I had walked out of my home, my phone rang. The caller ID read, Leo. The knot in my stomach tightened into a cold, hard stone. I let it ring twice, took a deep breath, and answered. Hello, I said, my voice practiced and calm, betraying none of the adrenaline coursing through my veins. Graham, what the hell is going on? Leo didn't bother with a greeting. His voice was high-pitched, a frantic, ragged edge to it. He sounded like a cornered animal. I'm not sure what you mean, Leo, I replied, keeping my tone even and neutral. I was following Arthur's script perfectly. Do not engage, do not argue, just state the facts. Don't PL. I dumb with me, he shouted, and I could hear Jessica in the background, her voice a shrill echo. The power just went out in the middle of the day, and we got a letter from the county, some kind of lien for unpaid taxes. They're saying the house insurance was canceled. What did you do? The sheer, unadulterated entitlement of the question almost made me laugh. What did you do? As if I were still the one responsible for the consequences of his actions. I did exactly what you told me to do, Leo, I said, my voice as cool as the glass of water on the table beside me. I left. When I left, my financial contributions to the household left with me. I assumed that as the new heads of the house, you and Jessica would be handling those responsibilities. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears grinding in his head, the dawning, horrific realization that this was not a mistake. This was a deliberate act. Your financial contributions, he stammered. What are you talking about? The house pays for itself. No, Leo, I said, and for the first time I allowed a sliver of the cold anger I felt to enter my voice. The house does not pay for itself, I paid for it. For 30 years I have paid for it. The income from the rental property my husband bought, the property you never even knew existed, is what paid the taxes, the insurance, and every utility bill you have ever generated. When you told me to leave, I redirected that income. It now comes to me. The well is dry. I heard a sharp intake of breath, then Jessica's voice, loud and clear as she must have snatched the phone. You manipulative old woman, you did this on purpose, you've ruined us. We were trying to get a loan for a new car and they denied us. They said our credit was shot because of some outstanding tax obligation. My credit is perfectly fine, Jessica, I replied smoothly. Perhaps you should be more aware of your own financial situation before applying for loans. Good financial hygiene is so important, don't you think? You think you're so clever, she shrieked. Leo's clients are coming for dinner on Friday. What are we supposed to do? Entertain them by candlelight? This is going to destroy his reputation. I would suggest you make a reservation at a nice restaurant, I said, though I imagine that might be difficult if your credit cards are also being declined. You should look into that. Leo got back on the phone. His voice was different now. The anger was gone, replaced by a desperate, pleading tone I hadn't heard since he was a little boy who'd broken a neighbor's window. Graham, please, you have to fix this. Just turn the money back on, just for a little while. We'll pay you back, I swear. Pay me back with what? With more empty promises? With more contempt? The little boy's voice didn't move me. It repulsed me because it wasn't real. It was just another form of manipulation, the last tool in his box now that bullying had failed. There is nothing to turn back on, Leo, I said, my voice hardening again into its final, unbreakable form. This is not a game. These are the consequences of your choices. You wanted to be the man of the house. You wanted to be in charge. Well, this is what being in charge looks like. It's not just about enjoying the assets, it's about paying the bills. I could hear him breathing, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. What do you want from us? He whispered. What's this all for? What do I want? I repeated the question, letting it hang in the air. I want my house, I want my life back, and I want you to finally understand that you cannot treat people, especially the people who have loved you and sacrificed for you, as disposable. You cannot throw away your family and expect the family bank account to remain open. I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. A process server delivered a legal notice to you over a month ago. I suggest you find it and read it carefully. It explains the situation in terms you might understand. Your 30 days are nearly up. The eviction notice, he said, his voice a choked squeak. We thought you were just being dramatic. That is another of your fatal errors, Leo, I said. You have never, not once, taken me seriously. You are about to learn that I am the most serious person you have ever known. I took a deep breath. It was time to end it. I have a meeting to get to. Goodbye, Leo. I hung up the phone before he could reply. I placed it back on the table, my hand perfectly steady. The adrenaline faded, replaced by a profound, cleansing calm. The storm had broken, and I was still standing. They had built their entire world on a foundation of my love and my money, and I had just pulled it out from under them. And I felt nothing but a quiet, solemn sense of justice. A week later, Arthur and I drove to 427 Elm Street. It was a crisp, clear morning, the kind where the autumn sun makes everything look sharp and defined. As we turned onto my street, a familiar pang of longing went through me, but it was different now. It wasn't the ache of a ghost haunting her past. It was the determination of a queen returning to reclaim her throne. Even from a distance, I could see things were wrong. The lawn, which I had always kept meticulously manicured, was overgrown and strewn with yellowing leaves. The cheerful red geraniums in the window boxes were brown and withered. The house looked neglected, unloved. It hurt to see it, but it also strengthened my resolve. They didn't just want to take my house, they were incapable of caring for it. Arthur parked his sensible sedan at the curb. He didn't turn off the engine. "Are you ready, Maggie?" he asked, his voice gentle. I looked at the magnificent oak tree in the front yard, the one Richard and I had planted when Michael was born. I nodded, my eyes fixed on the front door. "I'm ready." We walked up the flagstone path together. I didn't need to knock. I slid my old key into the lock. It turned as smoothly as ever. The door swung open. The entryway was dark. With the power out, the grand hall was cast in shadows. A pile of mail lay scattered on the floor. The air was stale and smelled faintly of takeout food. From the living room, I could hear the low murmur of voices. Leo and Jessica were sitting on the couch, surrounded by half-packed boxes and piles of clothes. They looked terrible. Their faces were pale and drawn, their clothes rumpled. Jessica was crying softly into a tissue. Leo was just staring into space, a look of utter defeat on his face. They looked up as we entered, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and resentment. "What are you doing here?" Leo asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. "I've come home," I said simply. My voice echoed slightly in the quiet house. I stood there with Arthur, a silent, formidable presence just behind me, and I felt none of the fear or shame that had plagued me for months. I just felt, right, this was my space. They were the intruders. Jessica stood up, her face blotchy and tear-stained. "You can't do this. This is our home." "No, Jessica," Arthur said, his voice calm but carrying the full weight of the law. "This is Margaret's home. You have been living here as her guests. That courtesy has been withdrawn. The 30-day notice to vacate expired yesterday. Legally, you are now trespassing." Leo finally found his voice, a weak flicker of his old arrogance. "Where are we supposed to go? We have nowhere to go. You've ruined us." "You ruined yourselves, Leo," I said, stepping further into the room. "You had a beautiful home, a family that loved you, and a life of comfort you didn't have to pay for, and you threw it all away because it wasn't enough. You were so blinded by what you thought you were owed that you couldn't see what you already had." I looked around the room, at the mess, at the dying plants, at the dust gathering on the furniture. "You didn't just disrespect me. You disrespected this house. You disrespected the memory of your grandfather who built it and your father who grew up in it." I let the silence hang for a moment before delivering the final terms. "Arthur has drawn up 2 sets of documents," I said, nodding to the briefcase in his hand. "You have a choice to make, and you will make it right now." Arthur stepped forward and placed 2 folders on the coffee table. "Option A," he said, tapping the first one, "is a rental agreement, a standard 1-year lease. You may rent the 2-bedroom guest suite in the west wing of this house. The rent will be market rate, $2,000 a month, due on the 1st. You will also be responsible for 1/3 of all utilities, which will be reinstated in my name and billed to you accordingly. You will have no access to the rest of the house, which will be Margaret's private residence." He paused, letting them absorb the terms. "Option B," he said, tapping the second folder, "is a mutual agreement to vacate. You agree to be out of this house with all your possessions within 72 hours. In exchange, Margaret will not sue you for the back taxes and damages you have incurred. If you refuse to sign either of these, I will have the sheriff escort you from the premises this afternoon, and we will proceed with legal action to recover all costs." Leo and Jessica just stared at the folders, their faces a mask of disbelief. They had expected me to fold. They had expected to bully or cry their way back into my good graces. They had never, in their wildest dreams, anticipated a legally binding contract. Rent, Jessica whispered, horrified. You want us to pay rent to live in our own home. It was never your home, dear, I said, my voice devoid of malice, stating a simple fact. You were just living in it, there's a difference. Leo looked at me, his eyes finally clear of the arrogance and entitlement. In their place was something I hadn't seen before, a flicker of comprehension. He was finally, truly seeing the consequences. He looked at the boxes, at his crying wife, at the dark, cold room. He looked at me standing there not as his soft-hearted Graham, but as his landlord. He picked up the rental agreement. His hands trembled as he read it. The choice was clear: humiliation and a roof over their heads, or pride and homelessness. After a long, tense silence, he picked up a pen from the table. We'll sign the lease, he said, his voice barely audible. He signed his name and then pushed the document toward Jessica. With a final, choked sob, she signed hers. Arthur took the document, reviewed it, and placed it neatly in his briefcase. Excellent, he said briskly. I'll arrange for the power to be turned back on this afternoon. The first month's rent is due tomorrow. I trust you can manage that. They didn't answer. They just sat there broken, on the couch in what was now their rented apartment. I looked at them one last time, at the wreckage they had made of their lives and nearly of mine. I felt no triumph, no joy, just a deep, profound sadness for the grandson I had lost, and a quiet, steely satisfaction that I had found myself. Welcome home, Margaret, Arthur said softly, holding the front door open for me. I stepped out into the sunshine, leaving them behind in the shadows. The air had never smelled so sweet. For a long time, I believed that love meant giving without limit. I thought that to be a good mother, a good grandmother, you had to be a soft place to land no matter what. I learned in the hardest way possible that that isn't true. True love, the kind that builds and endures, requires boundaries. It requires respect. And sometimes it requires you to be the strong one, the one who says no, not out of cruelty, but out of a deeper love for both yourself and for the person who has lost their way. I didn't set out for revenge. I set out to survive, and in the end, I didn't just reclaim my house, I reclaimed my dignity. I learned that you can love someone with your whole heart and still refuse to let them destroy you.